네, 감독님 뵙게 돼서 반갑습니다. 사실은 감독님의 신작을 굉장히 기다려왔던 사람으로서 이번 영화 바빌론을 보면서 무척이나 장대하면서 또 아름다운 영화라고 느껴졌습니다.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's great to be talking to you.
감독님이 사실은 지난 10여 년간 4편의 영화를 통해서 국제적으로 정말 많은 큰 성과를 거두셨고 또 많은 관객들의 사랑을 받으셨습니다. 그렇지만 특별히 한국만큼 사실은 감독님의 영화를 사랑했던 그런 관객들도 드물지 않겠나라는 생각을 하게 되는데요. 이번 영화를 통해서 만나게 될 감독님의 영화를 새롭게 만나게 될 한국에 있는 관객들에게 인사 말씀 전해 주시죠.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just so excited for Korean audiences to discover the film in general. It's been so, it's filled my heart with so much joy that that some of my previous films have sort of encountered such receptive audiences in Korea. So it makes me all the more, thrilled and excited to have this film opening there soon. Korea, it's a great place for cinema. I love Korean cinema, so to me, it's just an honor to be able to release a film there and share it with audiences there. So I can't wait.
감독님에 관한 저도 여쭤보고 싶은 질문들이 정말 많은데요. 일단 배우에 관한 질문들로 시작하겠습니다. 이 영화는 뭐 어떻게 보면 또 스타에 관한 영화라고 볼 수도 있을 텐데 이 시대에 가장 반짝거리면서 빛나는 스타라고 할 수도 있을 것 같은 브래드 피트 그리고 또 마고 로비라는 감독님의 이전 영화에는 출연하지 않았던 할리우드의 대스타 두 분이 또 이 영화에 나오십니다. 이 두 명의 배우와 함께 이 영화를 만들게 되신 그러면서 느끼게 되시는 소감 같은 게 있다면 현장에서 두 사람에 대해서 어떤 인상을 받으셨습니까?
Well, I mean, first of all, I'm just a giant fan, like so many people, of both of them. The thing that really excited me with this movie was to sort of, like you say, it's a movie about stars. So the idea of having stars playing stars and then using as a counterpoint actors who maybe we don't know as much, people like Diego Calva who plays Manny, to have them be sort of our eyes and ears, our sort of access point to encounter these larger-than-life stars like Brad and Margot. In Brad's case, he's playing a character who's been a star for a long time, just like Brad. In Margot's case, she's playing a character who is just becoming a star, sort of like Margot. So in some ways, the actors are very similar to their roles, and so therefore I think there was something interesting about how personal they were able to make the roles in their performances. So you feel like you're seeing real people underneath all the spectacle and the glamour.
네, 그 말씀에 따르면 사실은 이제 디에고 칼바라는 이 영화의 또 다른 축을 이루는 세 번째 주인공도 굉장히 흥미롭게 느껴지는 캐스팅이 됩니다. 상대적으로 국제적으로 거의 알려져 있지 않고 또 한국 관객들은 아마 이 영화를 통해서 처음 보는 사람들도 많을 것 같은데요. 이 영화 속에서 이 맨이라는 역으로 디에고 칼바라는 배우를 나머지 두 명의 대스타들에 맞서는 어떻게 생각하면 또 다른 주인공으로서 설정하시게 된 그리고 또 캐스팅하시게 된 감독님의 의도를 여쭙고 싶습니다.
Well, it was exactly that. I liked the idea of someone whose face we don't know that well. Because Manny, the character that Diego Calva plays, at the beginning of the movie is an outsider to this world. He's someone sort of at the bottom of the ladder, a dreamer who wants to break in, who wants to rise up to success, but feels a long way from it. So it just felt like if we could have someone who the audience doesn't have any preconception about, any sort of baggage associated with, he could become sort of an everyman, a real access point or entryway for the audience to embark on this adventure. But it made it a challenge to find an actor to play the role because it's a very big role. He sort of spans the whole length of the movie, goes through a big arc. So my producers and I, we wound up looking for about a year and a half. We looked at thousands of actors all across the world. And Diego Calva was living in Mexico City. He hadn't done much acting before, just a few films. Had never acted in English before. He didn't speak English that well. Had never acted in America before. So I found him, I fell in love with him. When he came to set, when you see him in the film, for instance, his character goes to set for the first time, a movie set for the first time. That was Diego Calva's first time on a real movie set. It was all sort of art imitating life, and I think it helps it feel even more real.
굉장히 재밌는 흥미로운 이야기네요. 감독님께 이 영화에 대한 어떤 그런 시간에 관한 시간적인 설정에 대해서 여쭤보고 싶습니다. 이 영화는 어떻게 보면 굉장히 러브스토리라고 볼 수도 있을 것 같고요. 또 한편으로는 뭐 굉장히 인상적인 직업 드라마라고 볼 수도 있을 것 같습니다. 그 못지않게 중요한 것은 이게 영화에 관한 영화라는 점일 텐데요. 그런 측면에서 영화에 관한 감독님의 생각과 영화에 관한 어떤 애정을 바치는 그런 영화로서 이 영화가 다루고 있는 시기가 굉장히 특별해 보입니다. 다시 말해서 무성영화 시대로부터 발성영화로 전환하고 있는 1926년도부터 1932년까지의 시기를 감독님께서 이 영화를 통해서 집중적으로 다루셨는데요. 영화에 관한 영화를 다루면서 왜 특별히 이 시기를 다루어야겠다라고 생각하시게 된 건지 궁금해집니다.
Well, there were a few things. First of all, it was a moment in time where movies still felt like this very young art form, this very new art form that many people in America, at least, and maybe around the world, didn't even think of as an art form. So I wanted to look at a period before movies became sort of respectable across mainstream society, when movies still had this sort of vulgar reputation among polite society, and look at the sort of Wild West kind of freedom that you saw in Hollywood at that time, right before sound came in. When sound came in, it brought with it a whole host of other changes. It wasn't just the change to sound, there was also a kind of host of moral changes, new moral codes being passed that restricted what you could do, both offset and on. Los Angeles was sort of turning into more of a real city, losing a little bit of that sort of desert town kind of feeling that it used to have. And Hollywood itself was really transforming from a kind of circus-like atmosphere to much more of an industry, much more of a corporate sort of machine of the likes that we now know today. So I kind of wanted to look at the last gasps of the sort of Wild West time before those changes happened, and then kind of see how the changes wound up sort of working their way through the various rungs of the Hollywood organism during the course of those years.
이 영화는 굉장히 장대하면서도 어떻게 생각하면 한편으로는 코믹하게 어처구니가 없기도 하고요. 또 한편으로 무척이나 화려한 파티 장면으로 시작을 합니다. 아닌 게 아니라 이 영화를 보면서 이제 가장 흥미롭게 느껴진 것 중에 하나는 이 영화 속에 등장하는 수많은 파티 장면이 사실은 영화 속에 등장하는 수많은 영화 촬영 장면만큼이나 중요하다는 것인데요. 이 양자 사이에도 관계도 무척 중요하게 느껴집니다. 그러니까 감독님께서는 이 1926년도부터 32년 사이에 영화에 관한 영화를 만들면서 또 다른 일면으로서 이렇게 집중적으로 많은 파티 장면을 영화 속에서 집어넣은 것은 어떻게 생각하면 영화에 대한 이면을 보여주기 위한 방식 같게 느껴지기도 하는데요. 파티 장면을 이렇게까지 이 영화 속에서 공들여서 그리고 멋지게 묘사하시게 된 감독님의 생각을 듣고 싶습니다.
Yeah, I was very interested in, like you say, that sort of give and take between the way people worked and the way people played. And so the sort of daytime, the days spent on sets, and then the nights spent with various shenanigans and then back and forth. I was really struck when I was sort of reading about the time of just how I kind of asked myself, when did these people sleep? It was such a kind of never-ending cycle where they would just be shooting almost from dawn till dusk. As soon as the sun set, they would leave the set and just party the night away. And the amount of drug use at that time and the amount of alcohol and just the level of sexual debauchery, it would just feel like parties that would just last all the way until dawn, and then they'd be back on set again. And it wasn't just even regular sets. They were often shooting multiple movies at a time, 3 movies a week, dozens of movies a month. It was this real sort of hamster wheel factory. So the sheer speed and intensity of the lifestyle just continues to kind of astonish me. I wanted to try to figure out what that might have been like. And then the more I sort of got into it and started trying to structure out the story of the movie, the more it felt to me that parties could be a way to anchor the film and show actually how society was changing. So each party in the film, to me, represents a different moment in society and in this kind of history of Hollywood where you kind of sense the changes in the air. And you could sense it by little things sometimes, like who's invited to the party and who isn't, who's knocking on the door and who's the guest of honor. Who's up and who's down. Because in Hollywood, that's always sort of changing. It's always the ranks are always getting reshuffled. The hierarchy is always in flux. And so the social pecking order felt actually very important to me, almost the way it is in like a Balzac novel or something, where you kind of get a sense of the overall picture of society just by these kind of microcosm glimpses that show you the hierarchy in effect and basically who's in and who's out.
그와 관련해서 인물관에 관한 부분도 좀 질문을 드리고 싶습니다. 사실은 이 영화에서 이제 중요한 주인공들이 세 명이 있다고 했을 때, 영화에는 이제 한 명이 떠오르는 스타가 있고 또 한 명은 이제 오래전부터 스타였던 대스타가 등장하게 됩니다. 나머지 한 명의 주인공은 이 두 사람 사이에서 오가면서 일을 하는 것으로 설정이 되어 있으면 무척이나 흥미로운데요. 이 맨이라는 주인공이 처음에는 잭을 위해서 영화를 시작하고 그러다가 나중에는 넬리를 위해서 일을 시작하는 방식으로 두 사람과 관계를 맺게 되는데요. 이 두 명의 스타에 관한 이야기를 또 다른 영화 일을 하게 되면서 그 둘을 동경하기도 하는 맨이라는 인물을 통해서 묘사하신 것에 대한 감독님의 어떤 생각을 듣고 싶습니다.
Well, I think at the outset I liked the idea of, starting the film in some way with certain characters at the very top of the Hollywood pecking order and certain characters at the very bottom. And then you sort of watch how they sort of might go in opposite directions or how they sort of cross paths like ships in the night. In Manny's case, again, I think to me he sort of represented just the proverbial dreamer who is freshly arrived to Los Angeles and isn't even sure exactly what he wants to do in the movies. He just knows he wants to be a part of it. And so he has this immediate bond with Margot's character, Nellie, just based on the fact that they, at the beginning of the movie, are both sort of outsiders. They're both outsiders with big dreams. And in the meantime, Brad's character, Jack, feels sort of impenetrable, feels like the king. He's always been the king, will always be the king. And so as the story goes on, I mean, I guess what became interesting to me was to show how those sort of positions in the ranking of things that might seem sort of set in stone, how fungible they are, how in flux it all is. That obviously Jack finds himself pretty quickly, much less securely up on his perch. Manny and Nellie both find themselves rising up, but then falling down and maybe rising again and falling. There's just this kind of, the idea of characters in constant movement that's often out of their control. One likes to think that, you make your own destiny and that what you want, you just go after it and you get it. But it's often so much more complicated than that. These characters all find themselves in different ways, almost the victims of circumstance. They find themselves in over their heads in a moment in time when things out of their control are happening that have a great effect on them. So sort of that kind of dynamic I think really interested me, especially looking at how it can be mapped differently over three people.
생방을 주방에서, 생방을 안방에서, 생방을 내 방에서, BTV 에어에서.
영화에서 묘사되는 그 영화계의 인물들, 특히 이제 두 스타인 주인공들을 포함해서 사실은 굉장히 흥미로운 지점들이 보입니다. 그것은 이 인물들이 그렇게까지 인간적으로 무척이나 고결하고도 또 그렇게 존경할 만한 그런 삶을 사는 인물이 아니다라는 설정입니다. 영화에 관해서 사랑을 바치는 러브레터라고 말할 수 있는 영화들은 세상에 굉장히 많이 존재합니다. 근데 저한테는 이 바빌론이 무척이나 특별하게 보이는 것은 러브레터를 바치는 그런 대상으로서의 영화에 관한 영화임에도 불구하고 그 속에서 만들어지는 영화의 환경이나 그 속에 등장하는 영화 속의 인물들이 그렇게까지 고결하고 고귀하지 않다는 것이 무척이나 흥미롭게 느껴집니다. 다시 말하면 그토록 절절한 사랑을 영화에 관해서 고백하는 영화임에도 불구하고 그 대상은 굉장히 혼란스럽기도 하고 어떻게 생각하면 저속하기까지 하는 환경 속에서 만들어진다는 건데요. 이와 같은 부분에서 사실은 개인적으로 깊은 감동을 받기도 했습니다. 감독님께서는 이와 같은 구조로 러브레터를 바치는 영화의 대상을 설정하시고 그것을 묘사하시게 된 감독님의 생각을 듣고 싶습니다.
Yeah, it was really important to me to try to show both sides in a way because I guess that's what really fascinates me about Hollywood overall is that it is both. It is this kind of merciless sausage factory that just kind of swallows people up and chews them up and spits them out mercilessly. And it's very messy and there's a lot of violence, both emotional, figurative, and sometimes even physical, that's involved in that process. But then of course at the same time, you think of Hollywood, especially old Hollywood, and you think of the illusion, you think of the Dream Factory, we think of, a close-up of Greta Garbo or Valentino, and, these almost seem like angels. They almost seem like they weren't even human. They're so perfect and sublime. And I particularly worship silent film. I just find that era just filled with so much exquisite art. So I think I grapple a little bit with that kind of paradox between how the art was made and the art that resulted. What's the cost of the achievement? What's the price that's paid in order for the dream to be realized? So in this film, I think I wanted to try to attack that idea in a more visceral way, especially to try to capture the feeling of Hollywood, again, before it was respectable, when it really was, when a lot of these sort of behaviors that now still happen but are kind of tucked underneath were out in the open. And there were no rules or regulations, there were no unions, people did die on sets, people were doing lots of drugs, people were kind of operating in this sort of unhinged, unbridled way. So I wanted to try to give the audience a really visceral sense of that, so they feel that they're in it, and then watch how that version of Hollywood changes, and all of that kind of outward outrageousness gets ultimately suppressed.
이 영화 속에서의 어떤 그 상황에 관한 부분들을 좀 질문을 드리고 싶은데요. 영화의 마지막 장면들이 이제 스포일러가 되어서 제가 자세히 거론할 수는 없을 것 같은데요. 이 영화의 마지막 장면을 보시면 정말 감독님이 어떻게 표현하시고 싶은 어떤 한 극단까지 브레이크 없이 끝까지 밀고 나간다는 생각을 하게 됩니다. 주인공 매니가 화면에서 마지막 순간에 극장에서 보게 되는 그 장면들에 대해서 감독님께서 그렇게까지 극단적으로 어떻게 생각하면 끝까지 밀어붙여서 감독님의 비전을 보여주신 것에 대한 감독님의 견해를 여쭙고 싶습니다.
Well, it was, in some ways, I'd have to say, a very lucky experience, especially as I look back and I sort of reflect on the making of the film. You know, it took a while to make. I first started sort of working on the bare bones of the script almost 15 years ago, so it was sort of marinating in my mind for a long time. I knew that I had to make a few other films in order to even sort of get to a place where I could convince anyone to do this film or this kind of film. It was such a big swing, it was such a gamble. But once we sort of got the film going, we were just, I have to say, really lucky. We had a studio that was willing to take the risk. Paramount was willing to basically support the vision that was on the page of the script without any compromises. And all the cast and the crew, you know, everyone who sort of signed on, they kind of knew what they were signing on for. Everyone knew that this was a risky project that wasn't like a lot of other movies. So you got this kind of exhilaration on set, I remember, and afterwards as well, where you felt that kind of, I guess that sort of shared excitement that we were doing something that, who knew if it would work or not, but at least it was different. At least, you know, we all felt that we were doing something unusual. And so that kind of became the mantra, the North Star of the whole process of making the movie, was that it needed to be a movie that went all the way, that sort of laid it all out on the field and just committed to this sort of singular vision.
라라랜드에서 보면 에마 스톤이 연기했던 미아라는 인물이 자기의 연인인 셰프 앞에서 연기 연습을 했을 때 상대방의 연기를 굉장히 칭찬합니다. 거기에 대해서 에마 스톤이 반응을 보였던 반응은 어떤 거였냐면 사람들도 좋아할까? 관객들이 좋아할까? 라고 했던 말이었습니다. 마찬가지로 이 영화에 등장하는 이 잭 컨레드라는 인물도 어떤 중요한 순간들마다 과연 관객들이 좋아할까를 되묻는 인물로서 영화에서 흥미롭게 묘사가 되고 있습니다. 그런데 역설적이게도 이 영화를 다 보고 나면 결국 이 영화에서 가장 중요했던 시드니를 포함한 세 인물들은 하나같이 가장 중요한 순간이 되었을 때 세상의 요구보다는 그에 맞서서 자신의 방식을 관찰하는 인물들이었고, 자신의 방식을 자기의 뜻과 달리 원하는 대로 할 수 없고 바꿔야 되는 상황이 되면 차라리 뒷모습을 돌아서서 떠나는 것을 선택하는 사람이었다는 면에서 무척이나 이 이야기가 입체적으로 느껴집니다. 제가 드리고 싶은 질문은 두 가지입니다. 첫 번째는 감독님은 이렇게 세상에 대한 요구와 세상에서의 요구와 감독님이 그에 대한 본인의 뜻과 이 양자가 충돌할 때 감독님 과연 잭 그리고 또 이 미아 혹은 영화에 등장하는 넬리와 같은 사람이신지 한번 여쭤보고 싶고요. 만약 그렇다면 이 영화 속에서 감독님께서 반드시 내 방식대로 해야겠다라고 고집하셔서 관찰하신 부분이 있다면 어떤 것인지 추가로 질문하고 싶습니다.
Well, I would like to think I'm the kind of person who stands their ground, you know. Those are the sort of filmmakers that I admire the most in the past, that I try to learn from. It doesn't mean, though, that you don't want to listen to those around you. You know, I do believe that one of the magic things about film is that it is truly a collaborative art form. I also think it's a mass art form. You know, I think movies at their birth were sort of thought of as the people's art. It was for the masses. Anyone could go to the movies and have an experience. So I do think the art of movies is inseparable from the audience, and so there does need to be that dialogue. But at the end of the day, yeah, I mean, I think the key is that if you feel something in your gut, you sort of have to listen to that. And there were many instances along the road with this film, for instance, where we would have those kind of challenges where, you know, sort of I or my team would feel something strongly about what the movie needed or something the movie needed to do or a place it needed to go to that maybe others weren't sure it should go to. There's a lot of different stuff in this film, and it goes to a lot of extreme places because, again, in my mind, that was the only way to really express authentically how extreme the lifestyle of this time was. I felt that most depictions of this kind of era in Hollywood history that I'd seen before sort of sugar-coated and whitewashed and sort of sanitized it a little bit. So I wanted to make sure to do sort of the opposite of that. And yeah, there were some times, especially when it comes to some of that more extreme content, where we sort of had to stick to our guns. But again, the lucky thing is that we were, you know, if we'd been in a less hospitable environment, I don't know if we would have been able to win those battles. But we ultimately, being at a place like Paramount, having the cast and crew that we had, people like Brad and Margot on our side, we, you know, at the end of the day, everyone around this film sort of understood the mission of it and the idea of it. So I think that's why we were able to really sort of preserve it and not compromise it the way we might otherwise have had to.
네, 감독님께 마지막 질문 드리도록 하겠습니다. 이 영화에는 이제 Singing in the Rain이라는 할리우드 고전이 굉장히 중요하게 차용이 됩니다. 근데 Singing in the Rain이라는 영화 자체가 그로부터 이 영화 만들어졌던 1950년대부터 한 20여 년 전에 다시 말하면 이 영화에서 가장 중요하게 다루는 시기를 집중적으로 다루면서 그 영화의 어떤 그 시절을 논평하는 영화라고 말할 수 있습니다. 흥미로운 것은 이 영화는 에필로그에서 다시 한번 Singing in the Rain을 끌어들임으로 인해서 어떻게 생각하면 논평하는 영화에 대해서 또 다른 코멘트를 하는 일종의 이중액자 구조를 가지게 된다는 건데요. 감독님께 여쭤보고 싶은 것은 이런 구조를 가져오시게 된 것은 Singing in the Rain 같은 할리우드 고전 영화에 대한 연대를 표현하기 위한 것입니까? 아니면 또 다른 그 생각을 갖고 계신 건가요?
Well, I think part of the sort of underlying story for me with this movie was not just the history of Hollywood, but how Hollywood tells its own history. How Hollywood kind of can tweak that history and sort of present maybe a more pleasant version of that history and make that the real history. You know, and so it makes sense that Hollywood would do that. Of course, Hollywood is all about telling stories, so Hollywood would tell its own story. And of course, this movie is part of that same tradition as well of Hollywood telling its own story. But I think, you know, obviously a lot of what this movie deals with is the ways in which maybe what really happened was different from what you see in Singing in the Rain, and you know, intentionally so. So the idea of having this kind of moment where one of our characters would sort of see his own experiences refracted back to him through something like Singing in the Rain felt really rich to me. It felt interesting. It felt like a way of grappling with, again, the paradox of Hollywood, how all the sort of darkness of Hollywood can somehow get turned into light. That's Hollywood magic, that's movie magic, that you can kind of take tragedy and turn it into comedy. And whereas this movie, in a way, does the reverse. It sort of starts as comedy and becomes tragedy. All of that being said, I also, it's not that I don't intend the film as a critique of Singing in the Rain. Singing in the Rain, to me, is one of the great films of all time. In fact, it's sort of the perfect Hollywood film because it takes that idea of Hollywood, of, you know, joyfulness and beauty and lightness and the happy ending, and it achieves the perfect version of that. It takes that idea and makes it into true art. So to me, it's sort of the perfect Hollywood movie. So it also made sense that Manny, after all the journey he's been on, that becomes so dark and tragic, that he would at the end be reminded in some way of the perfection and the sublime artistry that Hollywood is capable of in some instances. So again, that sort of paradox, I think, between the light and the dark, and between all the pain that Hollywood can cause and that art can cause, and all the beauty that it can wind up resulting in, was sort of key to me.
네, 영화에 관한 뭐 자세한 이야기, 또 친절하신 이야기, 또 도움이 되는 이야기들 말씀 대단히 감사합니다. 다음에 오실 때는 또 이제 다음 영화에서는 한국으로 직접 오셔서 팬들을 만나시고 관객을 만나시면 어떠실까 또 이렇게 한번 바라보게 됩니다.
I would love that as well. Thank you. I can't wait. And thank you so much for doing this.
네, 감사합니다.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
헐, 너 그거 안 받았어? 인터넷과 IPTV 가입할 때 놓치면 안 되는 헐인.
헐인?
응, 헐 할 만큼 놀라운 할인이어서 헐인. 딴 데는 없어서.
헐.
기본 할인에 30% 더.
헐 대박.
이게 뭐냐고?
더슬림
더슬림 요금제.